All right, hallelujah. We're going to try this for a second time. Um, so I will get right into it. So, as I was meditating today, the Father had given me a word, and it was a word of encouragement. And I wanted to share that word with you, those of you who perhaps find yourself in a similar season. And so, before we get started, this is my second round. I don't know what happened to the first one. I think we were having some audio trouble, but hopefully y'all can hear me. If somebody can just jump in on the chat and let me know. This way I don't have to redo the podcast. Just let me know if you can hear. I think we're okay. Let me see what we got going on here. And all right, so I don't know if any of you are in the chat, but if someone can just put in the chat and let me know if you can hear me. Can y'all hear me? Okay, let's get started then. So again, this is a word. It is a prophetic word. What do I mean by prophetic? It was a word that was given to me through the inspiration of the Ruach. Thank you, Olivia. And so, in other words, it was given to me by the inspiration of the Ruach. And it was actually the word Ebenezer, or as some of you may know the name as, okay, you guys can hear. Okay, good. Okay, Olivia says, yes, you can hear. All right, so the word is Eben Ha-Ezer, and again, it might be a name that you are maybe accustomed to pronouncing as Ebenezer or Ebenezer, but in the Hebrew, it's two words, Eben Azar, and in the book of First Samuel, it is used to speak of a place, and then eventually a prophetic indicator of something that Yah will do for the children of Israel at the time of First Samuel. All right, let's get started. Father, we just thank you for your Ruach that has been given to us. We ask that your Ruach would minister to us as you so desire, Father, that we would be wise enough to test all spirits, Father. And if this word it ministers to anyone out there, Father, I pray that it would encourage them, that it would give them a hope, Father, that you are with them. Despite their circumstances, despite what it looks like, Father, you are with them and you are faithful. You will finish the work that you've begun in them. And so we thank you again for your Ruach that ministers and encourages us. We thank you for your word that sustains us and nourishes us, especially in times of difficulties. In Yahushua's name, amen. All right. So again, this was a word that was given to me today. It was for a particular person that I had sent it out to. And initially, it started off by the word barrenness. That's the word I received, which was barrenness. And so, as I presented this word to that person, their response was that it was confirmation, something that Yah had already been speaking to them about their circumstances. And as I was praying for that individual and meditating upon the barrenness of Yah's people or those who had experienced barrenness in the Bible, I started to think about what it means to be spiritually barren. And so it just sort of ministered to me throughout the day. And then I received in my being the word Eben Ha-Ezer. And I said, Ebenezer, let me look this word up. So that's when I went to First Samuel. Now, as I was meditating on First Samuel, I said, I'm just going to go live and I'm just going to speak as your Ruach leads me. But then I was encouraged to actually write it down. And so that's what I did. And so I'm going to share it with you, as I believe that it is a word not just for the person that I gave it to, but it's for many of you that have perhaps found yourself in a season or in a place in your walk where it may seem as though you're not producing. Perhaps the Father has given you a word. Perhaps there was a promise that you were believing Him for. Maybe it was your marriage. Maybe it was your children. maybe, whatever it is that you feel that, you believe, that by faith that Yah has really put it in your being to hold on to. And I know that I know personally that we can grow discouraged. And, the word says that hope deferred can make the heart sick. So oftentimes when we're in the waiting, that's when we become somewhat discouraged. We don't fully understand what the Father is doing behind the scenes, preparing us and even the environment so that we can birth that promise, or so that we can bring it forth. And so we don't want to give up too soon. We don't want to miscarry the promise. We don't want to abort the promise. So it's best when we find ourselves in a season where the promise seems to be lagging, or where we don't see growth or development. Perhaps we're overcoming certain character issues, or perhaps we're in a battle for our children or our loved ones. Perhaps we're contending against a sickness or disease, or an ill report that we received, or whatever it is that's looming and threatening. It's very similar to the Philistines when they were ruling over the children of Israel. They did so mercilessly. They were just cruel, and they had their foot on the necks of the children. And so that's sometimes what the enemy can do when it comes to fear and anxiety. And especially, again, if we're hoping, the enemy does not want us to bring any of Yah's promises. He doesn't want us to bring them into the realm that we exist in. It's a kingdom of darkness, right? So he doesn't want you to produce light. He doesn't want you to produce the promises of truth. He doesn't want you to be a testimony of Yah's faithfulness. He wants to dim your light. He wants to speak to you in that barren place or in that wilderness, and he wants to discourage you. So I hope this word really encourages you, and you can see Yah's faithfulness. He is faithful. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So what he did for Hannah, he will also do for us. And there's so much more to the promises of Yahuwah that sometimes we can only see. We're limited. Sometimes we can't really see how this is going to affect the generations to come. And that's really how this message came about, as the Father was showing me that the work that he's doing in us is not just for us, but for the generations to come. And that doesn't mean that it has to come from your loins, like it has to be your seed that produces. It could be those that you are ministering to, even if you've sown just a seed in someone's life, even if you have, been a testimony to someone at work, or wherever you go. You have no idea what kind of role, how you will impact that person's future. And so I want to encourage you to stay the course, even when it seems like there's no water and it's dry and you're like, now what? I'm too old for this. Whatever it is that wants to speak defeat, whatever your Philistine looks like, I want to encourage you. So with that being said, the word that he gave to me: raise your Eben ha-ezer, Ebenezer. Raise your Eben stone. Raise your stone of help. Raise it. He wants you to raise your stone of help. For those of you who are weary, those of you who find yourself like, which direction are we going? What am I supposed to do now? He's saying to you, raise your stone of help. Now, the word Ebenezer was initially first in First Samuel is mentioned as a city where Israel was actually put to shame by the Philistines, not once, but twice. Now, can you imagine? They were put to shame. What does that mean? So let's look at that. Now, at this time and prior to Samuel's reign, because Samuel would not only be a prophet unto Yahuwah, but would eventually become a judge of Israel. But prior to that, Israel was being governed by judges whom Yahuwah raised up at critical times in the nation's history. However, at the time of First Samuel, the nation had degenerated both morally and politically. It had been under the perverse and oppressive rule of the Philistines. The temple at Shiloh had been desecrated, and even the priesthood was corrupt and immoral, as we see in the lives of the sons of Eli. Now, Shiloh was one of the main centers of worship during the pre-monarchic period. This is prior to King Saul. There were no kings, only judges. Now, before the first temple was built in Jerusalem, after the Israelite conquest of Canaan, that's when the tabernacle was moved there to Shiloh. It remained there during the period of the biblical judges. Now, into this religious and political confusion comes Samuel, okay? Now, the Philistines did remain in their cities throughout their conflicts with the Hebrew children. However, they would eventually be overthrown by the Davidic kingdom, by King David, a man after Yahuwah's heart, which is a whole nother um, there's a whole nother story. But nonetheless, the most famous or well-known story or encounter is when Samson encounters the Philistines. All right, so back to this word Eben ha-ezer, and what does it mean for us? Those of us who are holding on, like, a woman. I mean, it doesn't mean a woman or a man, but it's talking about, holding on to the promise, the seed of promise. And so, what does it mean for those of us who are holding on to promises that we are not willing to let go? We are likened to Hannah, right? So, in 1 Samuel chapter 4 and 5, remember the word Eben Azar was first a city where the children were put to shame. But in chapter 4 and 5, the word Ebenezer would then take on a more significant meaning as the stone of help. Now, without going too far, this would actually point towards Yahusha being the rock or the stone of help, our Ebenezer. Well, here we see Samuel take a stone, and then he places that stone between two locations. First one is Mizpah, and the second one is Sheen. Those are the names of the locales where he places the stone in between. Why is this important? Well, this would actually signify victory over the Philistines. It speaks prophetically to victory over shame. Now, the first word, Mizpah, is referring to the function of the eye. Thus, to watch or to look out or to perceive. And the second word is sheen, where we get the word tooth in the Hebrew. It's the Hebrew letter sheen, and it speaks of that which devours or consumes. Now, if any of you have come out of sin, which I'm thinking all of us who believe in the consecration of the Ruach have in fact come out of sin, and or at least are coming out of sin, and we know that it's a battle. Well, we also know that when our sin is full grown, when it has matured, it leads to death, and that is the point of utter consuming. It can consume us. Grief can consume us. Sin can consume us. Our feelings and our emotions, well, they can consume us. And so it's interesting that he places this Eben, this stone of help, between these two locations, and he declares victory over the Philistines. Well, Mizpah, referring to the eye, Sheen, referring to the tooth, speaks to something called the lex talionis. It's the law of retaliation, whereby a punishment resembles the offense committed in kind and degree. You can find that in Exodus 21:24. Now, why would this be a matter of lex talionis? Well, if you know anything about what the Philistines were doing or had done to the children of Israel, then you will understand why Yahuwah had given the children victory through the amunah, or the faith of Samuel. You know, and again, this is what he was showing me as we come against these, sometimes we can find ourselves in situations where we are being afflicted. We are being afflicted, or perhaps, we find ourselves, being tested, or we have an enemy that has persecuted us. We have the enemy of our soul that does not want to see us liberated. And so we can find ourselves up against the flesh and blood. Well, it takes a lot of self-control for us to yield and to wait patiently on Yahuwah, to trust Him to vindicate us. Oftentimes, we want to be impulsive, and then we will perhaps respond out of character, or our flesh will say, oh, we need to show them, or we need, to punish our enemies or whatever. But in this case, Yahuwah is saying no. To Samuel, he's saying, stand back. I will be your rock of help. I am going to be your helper, your Azar. I am going to deliver you from the yoke of your enemy. I will take vengeance, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And so that's why these two words, mispe and sheen, are important, because it's there he places the rock of help between the eye and the tooth. You see, he's saying for this reason, he's showing an attribute of his character to Samuel and to the people who their relationship with Yahuwah was pretty immature. It wasn't, their faith was still embryonic. It was still developing, as many of you, perhaps you've only come into the way, maybe a few years ago, or whatever the case may be. Your faith can still be maturing. And so as a result, the children didn't really know what to expect from Yahuwah. This is why his mercy and his grace was truly exemplified in the stories of First Samuel and Hannah. And so he puts it there, and he's saying to them, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and I will enact justice, and I will deal with your enemies even as they have dealt with you. Now, there is a battle between the children of Israel and the Philistines, but for us, it's a spiritual battle, right? Because we're not actually coming up against the Philistines, but it is a spiritual battle. Now, what would be the battle then that we're overcoming? Well, the word Philistine, or even the name Philistine, by definition, it means to wallow in the dust. That is to be covered in ashes, depicting great sorrow and distress. Now, the word for dust here, it means to be crushed or brought low, to be brought to nothing. And then the word ashes is afer, which means mourning when placed upon the head. But figuratively, this word ashes describes the wicked as ashes under the feet of the righteous. So again, you see a double meaning there. The first thing is that the word Philistine means to wallow in the dust or to be covered with ashes. And so this points to shame. When somebody was put to shame, or when they were in a place of mourning, they would rip their garments, and then they would throw dust on their heads as a sign of grief or a sign of defeat. And so this is symbolic of the spiritual battle that many of us have to endure time and time again, when the enemy would strive against us to bring us low, to place that shame that Yahuwah has taken off of us, to put that shame back on us, to cause us to trip up so that we can hang our heads low, so that we don't walk upright with confidence in knowing who we are. And so again, Philistines, dust and ashes, to wallow in it. So how many times have you found yourself in a situation or a season where perhaps, your body is failing you, or your finances are being, tested, or whatever the thing is, whatever it is that is challenging your faith. And, sometimes we can get stuck there. We can wallow in our circumstances. We can wallow in our ashes. We can wallow in defeat. And that is literally the spirit of Philistine. That is what Philistine means. It means to bring you low, to keep you in the dust, to keep you crushed, brought low to nothing, so that you don't produce. Now, Praise Yah. And so Isaiah 61:3, there's a promise. It says here that Yahuwah offers beauty to those who mourn in Zion. Now, when he gave me that word, Isaiah 61, which is how we combat the spirit of Philistine, this Philistine spirit, this spirit of sorrow, or this spirit that wants to crush us or bring us low or bring us to nothing. He gave me Isaiah 61, and I said, well, I think this word beauty is more than likely Yafa, because that's what Yafa means. It means beauty. So of course, I went, looked at the word, and in fact, it's not Yafa, it's Pe'er. And I said, interesting. So the word Pe'er in Hebrew and in this verse means a crown of honor. So Yahuwah offers a crown of honor to those who are mourning. It says here that the word for Philistine is ashes, that is to mourn. So he's saying that he's going to give us, instead of putting ashes upon your head, he will remove the ashes from your head and place a crown of honor. This word defines the beautifying of the hair, embellishing it with flowers or costly jewels or a crown or a head covering, thus a crown of glory. Now that makes a lot more sense to me, that he's going to pray, not give us beauty in the sense of aesthetic beauty, but that he's going to remove the shame from off of our head, that which brings us low. And instead, he is going to put a crown. He is going to become our covering. Now, you have to see this, because the Philistines were ruling over the children at that time. Because of their rebellion, because of their insolence, they were being covered, or their authority was a perverse authority that brought them to shame. But Yahuwah is righteous. He is glorious. He is a good shepherd. He is a good father, and he cares for us. And so when we put ourselves under his hegemony, when we put ourselves under his covering, that is when we receive that crown or that covering of glory. Hallelujah. Now, the word pe'er, which is beauty in Isaiah 61:3, remember, it's given in exchange for ashes, in exchange for one's shame. But this verse goes on to say that Yahuwah will comfort us with the oil of joy. And then finally, he says that he will clothe us with a garment of praise. Well, this garment of praise you have to remove something, and the garment that's being removed is something called sach wa epek. Sach wa epek, and sach wa epek means sackcloth. So a person that is under that oppressive spirit, that fit the rule of the Philistine, right, that perverse spirit that brings us to shame, is like one who is in the dirt, who wallows in the dirt, who has their clothes are covered with sackcloth and ash. They have a spirit of heaviness, according to Isaiah. But when we come boldly before Yahuwah and we trust him in our afflictions, that's when he says, listen, I am going to cover you, and I'm going to put glory upon you. I am going to crown you. I am your covering. And then I will give you a garment of praise. And so that's how we break through. That's how we break free. I'm going to show you what Hannah does, even in the midst of her season of barrenness. She praises the Most High. So when we are in this season where it seems like we're barren, the promises that Yah has given to us, they seem to be long gone. Maybe we're increasing in age, or maybe, we look at our children and we think, wait a second, it doesn't look like they are prospering or that they are fruitful. So we have to trust, we have to speak life. We have to do what Isaiah 61:3 says. We have to trust that he is our covering. We have to trust that he is watching over us, that he is protecting us. We have to trust that he will give us oil of joy. The word says that the joy of Elohim is our strength. We have to trust and we have to believe. And then we have to praise him even in the midst of trials and tribulations. Even when we are suffering, we open our mouths and we praise him. Now, the purpose of this, he says in Isaiah, is that he gives to us that garment of praise and he removes the spirit of heaviness, which is sackcloth. It's heavy. If you have a sack of potatoes, that sackcloth, it's heavy. And so that heaviness, he says, he removes it so that we might be called trees of righteousness. That is the planting of Yahuwah, so that he might be glorified. Now, back to the word here. So that's what basically in the natural, they were up against the Philistines, but in the spiritual, they were up against the oppressiveness, that oppression, which is likened to sin. Sin is an oppressor, a taskmaster that brings us low, that wants to crush us and devour us. Now, Shamuel or Samuel's remarkable birth speaks of Yahuwah's grace bestowed as favor upon his mother, Hannah, prefiguring the same for the nation, as they too had been made barren by the merciless onslaught of the Philistines. Now, if you don't know about the story of Hannah, she was barren and she had gone into the temple at Shiloh and she was beseeching Yahuwah in a time of barrenness, right? In her mourning, in her time of distress and sorrow. Remember, Philistines means to be crushed, brought low, brought to nothing. It means mourning, right? It means shame upon the head. And how many know that when a woman was barren in the Old Testament, or just in general, barrenness was associated with a woman's shame? It was to her shame that she could not produce children. And so this is the case with Hannah. And she takes her shame before Yahuwah. And look at what she does. So Eli confronts her because her mouth had been struck and she couldn't speak, but she was still mouthing the words and she was groaning from within. Now, this is very, very, very prophetic. Why? Because she's not speaking the words out loud, but her being is groaning from within. So she's heard. It says that Yahuwah hears her. He hears her groaning. It wasn't about the intensity of her cry outwardly, but about the moaning, the discomfort. She was not comforted. She was not comfortable in that place of barrenness or destitute or being destitute. Now, Eli confronts her and says, "Woman, are you drunk?" And she says, "No, I am not. Rather, I am as a woman grieved in spirit, one who has poured out my being before Yahuwah." In verse 16, she says she is not. Now, this is important. This is part of the prophetic word. She says she is not to be counted as a daughter of Belial. Belial here means worthless and without profit, and later on will actually typify Satan or the Abaddon, the destroyer, but that like the sons of Belial. But here she says, I will not be counted as a daughter of Belial. I will not be put to shame because of my barrenness, she says. Rather, she says that she has spoken. She tells Eli, no, rather, I have spoken out of the abundance of my grief. In other words, she's saying that there is life in her words. She's saying, no, I am speaking life. Her words were full of faith, full of hope, because she was relying on Yahuwah. Now, in parallel to that, she says, I will not be counted. That's the life she's saying. I will not remain barren. I will not be defeated, right? She's speaking life. Now, Eli's sons, in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12, it says that Eli's sons were called sons of Belial. for they knew not Yahuwah. You see the contrast there. That's done purposefully because she's saying, I am not. And she's speaking on behalf of the nation because they were under a foreign ruler, a wicked ruler, the Philistines, and they were causing the people to be barren. They were causing the people to be put to shame. And she was prophetically signifying those who said, I will not. I will call out to Yahuwah. Now she says that she pours out her spirit. That word is shafach, and it describes the intensity of one's soul. Remember, her mouth had been stricken. So it describes the intensity of one's soul, one's heart, or one's inner thoughts before Yahuwah as completely dependent upon him and his grace. That's what that word means. She says, I am relying on Yahuwah's grace. My being, my entire being is poured out, depending on his grace, which she eventually receives because Eli then tells her, go in peace. Yahuwah will indeed give you what you have petitioned of him. So the same Yahuwah is saying to us, what you have petitioned of me, that which you have groaned for, that's what's coming out of your belly, what you are hoping for, right? What you put your hope in me for. He is saying, I have heard you. I have heard your cry. I am with you. Now, here is something very, very profound. Remember, the word poured out means to rely on Yahuwah's grace. And then Eli says, because of his grace, you will receive it. Well, her name is Hannah. And Hannah means grace or favor. And she names her son Shemu'El. And Shemu'El means received of Yahuwah. So right there we see prophetically that grace is received of Yahuwah. Another attribute that Yahuwah is revealing to the children of Israel, that despite their crookedness, despite their corruption, he is full of mercy, full of grace, that he is able to bring them out of their barrenness. Now, in 1 Samuel, Hannah prays and she says, and this is the proclamation of her faith. She says, and this is before she even receives the promise of that seed, but yet she makes this proclamation and she says, my heart rejoices in Yahuwah. My horn is exalted in Yahuwah. My mouth is enlarged over my enemies because I rejoice in his salvation. She goes on to say that there is none set apart as Yahuwah, for there is none besides him. Neither, listen to this, neither is there a rock like our El. And this is before she gives birth to Samuel, who then takes the Ebenezer, the rock of help, and places it between those two locations, meaning an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is before Ebenezer, but she says that he is the rock of her salvation. And again, that's prophetic, right? She's making a proclamation with her mouth. She's speaking life, which tells us that even the most sinful and rebellious occurrences can be used to display Yahuwah's grace. Yahuwah uses the burden of Hannah's heart to bring a surprisingly larger solution to a burden of his own heart. Barrenness was not only Hannah's condition, but Israel's condition as well. It was a season of spiritual need and with little prophetic activity. And Yahuwah sought a voice to speak on his behalf to his people. In 1 Samuel 3:20, it says that Samuel was raised up as a prophet unto Yahuwah. He became, remember, he was trained under Eli, right? And he would eventually become an Eleazar, a helper. For whom? Now, if you know anything about prophets, prophets were usually raised up to assign, and they were assigned to kings or dignitaries to guide them or to be a mediator between heaven and earth, right? So they would hear the voice of heaven, they would hear the voice of Yahuwah, and then they would give counsel to those who represented Yahuwah on earth. So even the Ruach has been given to us as a Ezer Kenegdo. Ezer means help. And even in Genesis, when the woman is created for the man, she is called a helpmate, an Ezer Kenegdo. Ezer means help, and it's given a title given to the woman as well as the Ruach. And here in this case, Eleazar or Eli, and then Azar, right? Ebenezer, the stone of help. So the helper is given to us to be a mediator between heaven and earth so that we can be representatives on earth, those who receive wise counsel. So in 1 Samuel 3:20, it says that he was raised up as a prophet unto Yahuwah and Eleazar unto Saul. It's right after this, Saul is going to be ordained as king, and Samuel is going to be his counselor. Eventually, Saul will reject Samuel's help. This is also prophetic of rejecting the stone of salvation, the Eben Azar. In Matthew 21:44, it says, anyone who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. Saul will eventually be crushed because he rejects the Ebenezer, the stone of his help. Finally, Hannah could not know at the time that her intense intercession, and that's ultimately what it means, that she was interceding, she was crying out, praying to the Father for relief. She could not have known that her intense intercession for a child was moving in concert with Yahuwah bringing her a son, but also bringing forth the will and blessing of Yahuwah for an entire nation. Just like we can't always know that whatever he's doing in us, we think it's just for us, but we don't really know the magnitude of what he's doing in us. In her case, she thought, give me a son, but she had no idea that the promise, as it was fulfilled, would not just be for her, but for the entire nation. Wow. She, as she entrusts the longings of her heart of Yahuwah, he moves on her behalf, but also advances his larger plan through her at the same time. The prophetic word given through the testimony of Samuel's life is for those of you who are in a season of barrenness. Maybe you feel defeated, discouraged, and even overwhelmed by shame. Yet today, Yahuwah wants you to know that he is with you, even in your pain and suffering, even as he was with Hannah. Not only did he give her a son, but 3 sons and 2 daughters. Yahuwah is not so concerned with our outward appearance, but more so the posture of our heart. For in 1 Samuel, it is said that Yahuwah is more concerned with our obedience. This is what is desired above sacrifice. This indicates that doing right in his eyes requires active faith. Finally, we see that Yahuwah is a merciful judge. He's full of grace, full of compassion. In Psalm 37:35, we are told to, 37:3-5, we are told to trust in Yahuwah and do good, to dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness, that we are to delight ourselves in Yahuwah, and He will give us the desires of our heart. We are to commit our ways to Him. We are to trust Him that He will do it. Despite what it looks like, beloved, we are called to wait on Him, to trust that He has heard our petition, the moanings of our heart, and that He will grant us what we have desired. In due time, we will see His goodness. We will see His salvation. And then we will lift up the Eben Azar, the stone of help. So that's the word that He gave to me today that I felt led to share with you all. And it really is against the shame of barrenness, and to trust that no matter what it looks like outwardly, no matter what it looks like, we don't live by what is seen outwardly, but we live by faith. And therefore, we keep our eyes on Him. He will bring it to pass. Remember, sometimes the answer is not so easy, and therefore it can't come in our timing. Sometimes what He's doing in your life, the promise that He gave to you, is not just for you. Sometimes that promise is much, much bigger. Sometimes that promise is for a multitude. And that's why it takes time, so that He can put everything in its proper place and set it in motion. So I hope you're encouraged. I trust that all of us who are waiting on Him, we will not be put to shame. We will not be put to shame. Continue to endure, continue to trust, sing a song of praise in the midst of your storms. Be encouraged. He's got you. He's faithful. He is not changing. He's not a shadow. He's not shifting. He's got your children. He's got you. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Those who are in the streets, those who are on drugs, those who are in broken relationships, those of you who have overcome abusive situations and broken relationships and experienced the sting of divorce, for those of you who are overcoming, sexual sins and addictions to pornography and alcohol and nicotine and whatever it is that your flesh once desired. Because before, you were under the rule of the Philistine, you were under the rule of your flesh, and it brought you low, and it kept you under the fetters of shame. But you've been called to something greater, and you've overcome much. And so stay encouraged. And when you find yourself forgetting, remind yourself. Sometimes you have to minister to yourself. Sometimes you have to preach to yourself, like David did. David said, "Why are you so downcast? Why have you been brought low, O my soul? Put your hope in Yah." And this is what Hannah did. So I pray that you will be encouraged and to do the same. And I think that's pretty much it. Yah be with you. Shalom, shalom.